Amara Johnson walked slowly toward the school auditorium, her heart beating fast in her chest. Today was the day of the Nativity play auditions, and the 12-year-old had practiced for weeks. She wanted the role of Mary more than anything. Her mother, Mrs. Johnson, gave her a quick hug before Amara joined the line of students waiting their turn. "You'll do great, honey," Mrs. Johnson said with a smile. "I'll be right here waiting when you're done." Amara nodded and took a deep breath. She had memorized her lines perfectly and even practiced the song she would sing. Her voice teacher had told her she had natural talent, and Amara hoped the drama teacher, Mrs. Phillips, would think so too. Inside the auditorium, the lights felt hot and bright. 5 students sat in the front row waiting their turn. Mrs. Phillips sat at a small table with her assistant, Mr. Roberts, making notes on a clipboard. Amara watched as Emily Clark, a girl with blonde hair from her math class, finished her audition. Mrs. Phillips smiled widely. "Very nice, Emily. You're definitely in the running for Mary. Please send in the next student." When it was finally Amara's turn, she walked to the center of the stage with confidence. The butterflies in her stomach settled as soon as she began to speak. The words flowed easily, just as she had practiced. When she finished her lines, Mrs. Phillips asked her to sing the song they had provided. Amara closed her eyes and let her voice fill the room. The melody rose and fell beautifully, and when she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Mr. Roberts began to clap. "That was really something special," he said, looking impressed. Mrs. Phillips nodded slowly, but didn't smile like she had for Emily. She wrote something on her clipboard and then looked up at Amara. "You have a lovely voice, Amara. Very strong delivery on the lines too," she said. "But I'm not sure you're quite what we're looking for in the role of Mary." Amara's smile faded a little. "I could try it again if you want." Mrs. Phillips shook her head. "It's not about your performance. It's just that, well, we have a certain look we're going for with this production. Traditional, you know? Maybe you'd be better suited for one of the angels or shepherds." The room grew quiet. Mr. Roberts shifted uncomfortably in his seat, looking down at his notes. Amara stood frozen on the stage, suddenly understanding what Mrs. Phillips meant. "You mean because I'm black?" Amara asked quietly. Mrs. Phillips blushed and shuffled her papers. "That's not what I said. We just have a vision for how the characters should look. It's about historical accuracy." From the side of the stage, Jasmine, another student waiting to audition, whispered to her friend loud enough for everyone to hear. The people from that region weren't white either. Mrs. Phillips cleared her throat. "Thank you, Amara. We'll post the cast list on Friday. Please send in the next student." With burning cheeks, Amara walked off the stage. Her legs felt heavy as she pushed open the door to the hallway where her mother waited. One look at Amara's face told Mrs. Johnson everything she needed to know. "What happened, sweetheart?" she asked, putting her arm around her daughter's shoulders. As they walked to the car, Amara explained what Mrs. Phillips had said. Her mother's face grew serious, but she stayed calm. "Let's go home and talk about this," Mrs. Johnson said quietly. "Some people have small minds, but that doesn't mean you have to have a small heart." Amara nodded, but the tears she had been holding back finally began to fall. All her hard work, all her practice, none of it mattered because of how she looked. The unfairness of it hurt worse than any fall or scrape ever could. The Johnson family dinner table was quiet that evening. Mrs. Johnson had made Amara's favorite meal, fried chicken with mac and cheese, but the food sat mostly untouched on her plate. Amara pushed the cheesy noodles around with her fork, her mind still at the school auditorium. "Do you want to talk about what happened today?" Mr. Johnson asked gently. He had come home from his job as a high school English teacher to find his normally cheerful daughter silent and withdrawn. Amara looked up, her eyes still red from crying earlier. "Mrs. Phillips said I don't fit the look for Mary, but I sang better than anyone else. I know I did." Her younger brother, Marcus, looked confused. "What look?" "Mary was from the Middle East, right? That's what we learned in Sunday school." Mrs. Johnson nodded. "That's right, Marcus. People from that region had brown skin, not pale white skin like we see in most nativity pictures." "Then why can't Amara be Mary?" Marcus asked, still not understanding. Mr. Johnson put down his fork and sighed. "Sometimes people have ideas in their heads about how things should look, even when those ideas aren't based on facts. And sometimes those ideas hurt other people. It's not fair, Amara said, her voice breaking. I practiced so hard. You're right, it's not fair, her father agreed. And we can talk to the principal about it if you want us to. Amara thought for a moment, then shook her head. No, I don't want to be given a part because my parents complained. That would make things worse. Mrs. Johnson reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. I'm proud of you for thinking that way. This isn't right, and we shouldn't just accept it. After dinner, Amara went to her room and sat on her bed. The walls were covered with posters of her favorite singers, Leonce, Alicia Keys, and Lizzo. Strong black women who had faced their own challenges but never gave up. Amara picked up her journal and began writing down her feelings. The hurt, the anger, the confusion, it all poured onto the page. Later that evening, her grandmother called. Grandma Rose had been a civil rights activist in her younger days and had stories about fighting much bigger injustices than a school play. Amara told her what had happened. My sweet girl, Grandma Rose said, her voice warmed through the phone. I'm sorry this happened to you, but remember this, when people close doors on you because of who you are, sometimes the best response is to build your own house. What does that mean? Amara asked, wiping a tear from her cheek. It means that when people won't make space for you, you create your own space. And you make it so wonderful that they wish they had welcomed you in the first place. After talking with her grandmother, Amara felt something shift inside her. The sadness was still there, but now there was something else too, a small spark of determination. Before bed, she checked her phone and saw several text messages from her friends who had been at the audition. They were all angry on her behalf. Jasmine had written, Mrs. Phillips was totally wrong. You were the best one there. That night, Amara couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what her grandmother had said about building her own house. As she stared at her ceiling, an idea began to form in her mind. What if, instead of fighting to be in a play where she wasn't wanted, she created something new? Something better? The next morning, she woke up early and went downstairs. Her parents were surprised to see her up and dressed before anyone else, especially with a notebook in her hand and a determined look on her face. Mom, Dad, she said with new confidence in her voice. I need to talk to you about something important. I have an idea. Mrs. Johnson looked at her husband, and they both saw the change in their daughter. The hurt wasn't gone, but it had transformed into something powerful, something that might just surprise everyone, including Mrs. Phillips. Saturday morning found Amara at her grandmother's community center. Grandma Rose ran the East Side Community Center, a place where people of all ages gathered for classes, meetings, and special events. Every weekend, Amara helped out by organizing art supplies and watching the younger children during the morning classes. Today, however, Amara was not her usual cheerful self. She moved slowly through her tasks, her mind still working through the hurt from the audition. Something troubling you, child? Asked Mr. Washington, the elderly handyman who had maintained the center for almost 20 years. Nothing escaped his notice, especially when it came to the regular volunteers. Just thinking, Amara replied, sorting a box of colored markers. Grandma Rose walked over, carrying a stack of flyers. These need to go on the bulletin board, Amara, and remember, thinking is good, but action is better. As Amara took the flyers to the main hallway, she noticed they were for various holiday events happening around the city. There was a Christmas concert at the high school, a Hanukkah celebration at the synagogue across town, and a Kwanzaa workshop at the library. She pinned them neatly to the board and stepped back to look at them. So many different celebrations, she said to herself. Just then, a group of children ran past her, laughing as they chased each other. Amara recognized kids from many different backgrounds. Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, all playing together without a second thought about their differences. Something clicked in Amara's mind as she watched them. These children didn't see each other the way Mrs. Phillips had seen her. They just saw friends. Amara walked back to the main activity room where several children were drawing pictures. She sat down next to a little girl named Zara who was coloring a picture of what looked like a family celebration. What are you drawing? Amara asked. It's Eid, Zara explained proudly. It's a special day for my family. We wear new clothes and eat special food. That sounds nice, Amara said, picking up a crayon to help color. A boy named Miguel leaned over from across the table. My family has a big party for Three Kings Day in January. We get presents and eat the special cake with a toy inside. One by one, the children started sharing stories about their holiday traditions. Amara listened carefully, suddenly very interested. Each child had something different to share, something unique and beautiful about their culture. What about you, Amara? Asked a small voice. It was Lily, a shy 6-year-old who rarely spoke up. Well, my family celebrates Christmas, Amara began, but we also do Kwanzaa, which celebrates African heritage and culture. As the children returned to their artwork, Amara sat very still, her mind racing with a new idea. What if there was a holiday show that included everyone's traditions? Not just the usual Christmas play, but something that showed all the beautiful ways people celebrated during the winter season. She pulled out her notebook, the same one she had brought to breakfast with her parents, and began writing quickly. The children's stories had given her exactly what she needed to fill in the details of her plan. When Grandma Rose came to check on the art session, she found Amara writing furiously, surrounded by curious children. "What's got you so excited?" Grandma Rose asked with a smile. "I know what I want to do now," Amara explained, her eyes bright with purpose. "I want to create a holiday show that includes everyone, all the traditions, all the cultures, all the celebrations. No one would be left out because they don't fit the look." Grandma Rose's smile grew wider. "Now that sounds like a fine idea, and we happen to have a perfect space for it right here." Amara looked around the community center's main room. It wasn't as fancy as the school auditorium, but it was large and open, with a small stage at one end. More importantly, it was a place where everyone was welcome. "Do you think we could really do it here?" Amara asked, hardly daring to hope. "Child, this center was built for exactly these kinds of dreams," Grandma Rose said, placing a hand on Amara's shoulder. "The question is, are you ready to make it happen?" Amara looked down at her notebook, filled now with ideas, names, and possibilities. The rejection that had hurt so much was becoming the fuel for something new and wonderful. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm ready." The community center's office was small but tidy. Ms. Rodriguez, the center director, sat behind her desk reviewing budget sheets when a soft knock interrupted her work. She looked up to see Amara standing in the doorway, clutching a folder to her chest. "Amara, what brings you by on a Tuesday afternoon? Shouldn't you be at basketball practice?" Ms. Rodriguez asked, setting her papers aside. "I quit the team," Amara said, stepping into the office. "I need time for something more important." Ms. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Amara had played basketball since she was 7 years old. "That sounds serious. Have a seat and tell me about this important thing." Amara sat down, took a deep breath, and opened her folder. Inside were neatly typed pages, colorful drawings, and a list of names. "I want to create a holiday show at the community center," Amara began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Not just a Christmas play, but a show that includes everyone's traditions and celebrations." Ms. Rodriguez leaned forward, interested. "Go on." "I've been talking to lots of kids at the center, and everyone has different special days they celebrate in winter. Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Diwali, Three Kings Day." Amara pulled out her list. "I want to make a show that tells all these stories, with music and dancing from each culture." "That's an ambitious idea," Ms. Rodriguez said carefully. "But what made you think of this now? The holidays are only 6 weeks away." Amara's eyes dropped to her hands for a moment. "I tried out for the Mary role in my school's nativity play. The teacher said I didn't fit the look they wanted." Understanding dawned on Ms. Rodriguez's face. "I see. And instead of giving up, you decided to create something new." "Yes, something where everyone fits, no matter what they look like," Amara said firmly. "My grandma says when people close doors on you, sometimes you need to build your own house." Ms. Rodriguez smiled at the familiar wisdom of Grandma Rose. "Your grandmother is a wise woman. But Amara, organizing a show like this is a big job. There's planning, rehearsals, costumes, music." "I know," Amara said, pulling out another paper from her folder. "That's why I made this schedule. We could have rehearsals 3 times a week after school and on Saturday mornings. My dad said he would help with the music, and my mom can help with costumes." Ms. Rodriguez looked impressed as she reviewed Amara's detailed plan. For a 12-year-old, she had thought of nearly everything. What about the performers? Who would be in this show? She asked. I already asked some kids at the center, and 15 want to participate, Amara said proudly, showing her list of names. And I think more will join when they hear about it. Ms. Rodriguez studied Amara's face. The girl's eyes shone with determination and hope. This wasn't just about putting on a show. This was about healing a wound and creating something meaningful. We would need a budget for materials, Ms. Rodriguez said thoughtfully, and we'd have to clear the schedule for rehearsals and the performance date. Amara held her breath. Was this a yes? The performance could be our main December event, Ms. Rodriguez continued, thinking aloud. We could sell tickets for $5 each to cover costs, maybe have a bake sale too. So, can we do it? Amara asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Ms. Rodriguez stood up and walked around her desk. Amara, this is exactly the kind of program the center was created for. Yes, we can do it, but you'll be taking on a lot of responsibility. I'm ready, Amara said, standing up straight. And I won't be doing it alone. No, you won't, Ms. Rodriguez agreed. Let's set up a planning meeting for Thursday evening. We'll invite your parents and anyone else who wants to help. As they walked out of the office together, Ms. Rodriguez placed a hand on Amara's shoulder. You know, when someone turns rejection into something positive like this, it says a lot about their character. Amara smiled, feeling a warm glow of pride replace the hurt that had lived in her chest since the audition. One more thing, Ms. Rodriguez said as they reached the main hallway. What are you going to call this show? Amara hadn't thought about a title yet. She considered for a moment before answering. How about Every Light Shines? Because that's what winter celebrations are all about, bringing light to the darkness. And everyone's light deserves to shine. Ms. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Perfect. Now let's make it happen. Word about Amara's holiday show spread quickly through the neighborhood. By the first planning meeting on Thursday evening, 30 people packed into the community center's meeting room. Parents, children, and even a few teachers from the local schools came to hear about Every Light Shines. Amara stood at the front of the room, her heart beating fast. She had never spoken to such a large group before. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice shaky at first. I want to create a holiday show that includes everyone's traditions and celebrations, a place where all of us belong. As Amara explained her vision, she grew more confident. The room filled with excited chatter as people offered ideas and volunteered to help. Ms. Rodriguez wrote everything down on a large whiteboard. But not everyone was supportive. Mr. Patel, whose daughter Preya wanted to join the show, raised his hand with a worried look. This is a wonderful idea, he said. But isn't it too much for a child to organize? No offense, Amara, but you're only 12. Maybe an adult should be in charge. Several others nodded in agreement. Amara felt her confidence waver. I understand your concern, Ms. Rodriguez said before Amara could respond. But Amara came up with this concept and has already done impressive planning. She will be the director, with adults supporting her. I believe she can do this. Mr. Patel didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue further. After the meeting, another problem became clear. Only 5 adults have volunteered to help, and they all had limited time. They needed more people for costumes, set design, and supervision during rehearsals. We'll figure it out, Amara's mother assured her as they drove home. Quality is more important than quantity. The next day at school, Amara faced a different challenge. As she put up posters advertising auditions for the show, she overheard 2 girls whispering. She's just doing this because she didn't get the Mary role, one said. She's such a drama queen. Amara's cheeks burned, but she kept hanging the posters. She wouldn't let mean comments stop her. The biggest surprise came that afternoon. Amara was leaving school when she heard someone call her name. It was Mrs. Phillips, the drama teacher who had rejected her for the Nativity play. Can I talk to you for a moment? Mrs. Phillips asked, looking uncomfortable. Amara nodded stiffly. I heard about the show you're organizing at the community center, Mrs. Phillips said. It sounds innovative. Thank you, Amara replied, not sure where this conversation was going. Mrs. Phillips shifted her weight from one foot to the other. I wanted to say that I've been thinking about what happened at the audition. The way I handled things wasn't right, and I'm sorry. Amara hadn't expected an apology. She didn't know what to say. I also wanted to offer my help, Mrs. Phillips continued. I have experience directing shows, and I could volunteer some time to assist with rehearsals. Amara was stunned. The teacher who had hurt her now wanted to help. I'll need to think about it, Amara said carefully. That evening, she discussed Mrs. Phillips' offer with her parents. It's up to you, her father said. But sometimes the people who hurt us can become our strongest allies when they realize their mistakes. After much thought, Amara called Mrs. Phillips and accepted her help. But I'm still the director, she made clear. This is my vision. Understood, Mrs. Phillips agreed. I'm here to support, not take over. The first audition day brought another challenge. Too many performers and too little space. 65 children and teenagers showed up, all wanting to be part of the show. We can't include everyone, Ms. Rodriguez worried. The stage isn't big enough. Amara looked at the eager faces waiting for their turn to audition. She remembered how it felt to be told she didn't fit. We'll make it work, she decided. Everyone who wants to be in this show will have a part. We'll use the whole room if we have to, not just the stage. Ms. Rodriguez smiled. That's thinking outside the box, but it will make your job as director much harder. I know, Amara said. But that's the whole point of Every Light Shines. Everyone belongs. As she called the first group to audition, Amara knew the real work was just beginning. But looking at her growing team, including Mrs. Phillips organizing sheet music in the corner, she felt ready for whatever challenges came next. The community center hummed with activity as rehearsals for Every Light Shines entered their third week. What had once been an empty room now buzzed with energy as children practiced their parts and adults worked on sets and costumes. Amara stood in the center of it all, clipboard in hand. She had divided the show into 8 sections, each celebrating a different winter tradition. Now she watched as the Diwali group practiced their dance under the guidance of Mrs. Sharma, Priya's mother. Beautiful movement, everyone, Amara called out. Remember to smile and really feel the joy of the Festival of Lights. The dancers beamed at her praise. Even Mr. Patel, who had doubted Amara's leadership, now watched with pride as his daughter performed. In the corner, Mrs. Phillips worked with the music group. She had proven to be a valuable helper, bringing her experience without trying to take control. Sometimes Amara caught her watching with a thoughtful expression, as if seeing something new in the young director she had once rejected. Amara, we have a problem with the 3 Kings Day costumes, Ms. Rodriguez said, approaching with a worried look. The fabric we ordered hasn't arrived, and the performance is only 2 weeks away. Amara bit her lip, thinking quickly. What about the gold curtains in the storage room? They're not being used, and we could make beautiful robes from them. Ms. Rodriguez smiled. That's perfect. I'll tell the costume team. As she walked away, Amara's father arrived with boxes of supplies. He had taken time off work every afternoon to help with the show. How's my director doing today? He asked, setting down the boxes. Busy, Amara replied. But good busy. Mr. Johnson looked around at the organized chaos. You know, a reporter from the City Tribune called me today. Someone told her about the show, and she wants to do a story about it. Amara's eyes widened. A real newspaper wants to write about us. About you, specifically, her father corrected. About a 12-year-old who created an inclusive holiday show after being rejected for not fitting the look in her school play. Amara wasn't sure how to feel about this. She hadn't told her story to get attention or to make Mrs. Phillips look bad. I don't want it to be about that, she said finally. It should be about the show and all the kids who are part of it. Her father nodded. I'll tell the reporter to focus on the positive, on what you've created, not why you created it. Later that afternoon, a small crisis erupted when 2 of the Hanukkah song performers got into an argument about who would stand where. I always stand in the front, shouted Ben, a 10-year-old with a powerful voice. But you can't see me when you're in front, complained Sophia, who was shorter. Amara stepped in, speaking calmly but firmly. In this show, we don't have front and back positions. We have a circle where everyone can be seen and everyone is important. She rearranged the group into a new formation where all 8 children would be visible. Ben and Sophia looked at each other, then nodded, satisfied with the solution. You handled that well, Mrs. Phillips said quietly as the group resumed practice. I learned from experience, Amara replied. It hurts when you feel invisible. Mrs. Phillips looked away, a flush of shame crossing her face. By the end of the week, the reporter from the City Tribune had visited rehearsal and written her story. The article appeared in Sunday's paper with the headline, "Local Girl Creates Inclusive Holiday Show That Celebrates All Traditions." The phones at the community center wouldn't stop ringing the next day. People from all over the city wanted tickets to the show. What had started as a small community event was becoming something much bigger. "We've sold all 200 tickets," Ms. Rodriguez announced during rehearsal. "And people are still calling. We might need to add a second performance." Amara felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. More people meant more pressure to make the show perfect. "Do you think we're ready?" she asked Mrs. Phillips as they reviewed the program. The teacher looked at Amara with newfound respect. "More than ready. This show has something most professional productions lack: heart. Real, genuine heart." As rehearsal ended that day, Amara watched the children leave with their parents, chatting excitedly about costumes and lines. Whatever happened on opening night, she had already succeeded in creating something special, a place where everyone truly belonged. The evening of December 18th arrived with a light snowfall that dusted the community center's roof and steps. Inside, the large room had been transformed. Rows of chairs filled the floor space, colorful lights hung from the ceiling, and a makeshift stage area took up the entire front section. A hand-painted sign reading "Every Light Shines, Welcome Visitors" at the entrance. Behind the curtain, chaos reigned. Children in colorful costumes rushed about. Parents adjusted last-minute details, and Ms. Rodriguez tried to maintain some order. "Has anyone seen the Kwanzaa candles?" she called out, looking increasingly worried. In the middle of the storm stood Amara, surprisingly calm. She wore a simple gold dress that her mother had made, with a red sash around her waist. As the show's creator and director, she would introduce each section and help transition between performances. "The candles are right here," Amara said, pointing to a box near the props table. "And Miguel, your crown is crooked. Let me fix it." As she straightened the Three Kings Day crown on the young boy's head, Mrs. Phillips approached. "5 minutes until we open the doors," she said. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous," Amara admitted. "But good nervous. Look." She pulled back the edge of the curtain to peek into the main room. The sight took her breath away. Every seat was filled. People stood along the walls, and more were still coming through the doors. "We added 50 extra chairs, and it's still not enough," Mrs. Phillips said with a smile. "Your school principal is here, and I think I saw the mayor too." Amara let the curtain fall back into place. "I just want everything to go well for the kids. They've worked so hard." "They have an excellent director," Mrs. Phillips said, placing a hand on Amara's shoulder. "Now, shall we begin?" Amara nodded and gathered all the performers for a final pep talk. "Remember, this show isn't about being perfect," she told them. "It's about sharing our traditions and celebrating together. If you forget a line or miss a step, just keep going and have fun." The children formed a circle and put their hands in the center, chanting "Every Light Shines," before breaking apart to take their positions. At exactly 7:00 p.m., Ms. Rodriguez stepped onto the stage to welcome the audience. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began. "What you're about to see is something special, a show created by a remarkable young woman who believed that every tradition deserves to be celebrated and every person deserves to be seen." She gestured toward the side of the stage. "Please welcome our director, Amara Johnson." The audience clapped loudly as Amara walked to center stage. Some people even stood up, creating a small wave of movement through the crowd. Amara spotted her family in the front row, her grandmother wiping a tear, her brother giving a thumbs up. And then, in the third row, she saw her school's drama club. And next to them, Mrs. Phillips' assistant, Mr. Roberts. They had all come to see her show. "Welcome to Every Light Shines," Amara said, her voice clear and strong. "Tonight, we'll take you on a journey through winter celebrations from around the world. Each light is different, but each one matters. Each one makes the darkness a little less dark." With that, the show began. The Diwali dancers twirled with electric tea lights in their hands, creating patterns of light against the darkened room. The Hanukkah singers performed their song perfectly, standing in the circle formation that gave everyone visibility. The Christmas section featured traditional carols alongside newer songs from different countries. Each performance flowed into the next, just as Amara had planned. When little things went wrong, a dropped prop here, a forgotten line there, the children recovered quickly, encouraged by Amara's calm presence at the side of the stage. The final number brought all 65 performers together in a song that Amara and her father had written specifically for the show. As the last notes faded, the audience rose to their feet as one, applauding with such force that the sound seemed to make the building shake. Amara stepped forward, tears in her eyes, and took a bow alongside her cast. In that moment, with the love of the community surrounding her, she knew that sometimes the best response to rejection was not anger, but creation. 6 months had passed since Every Light Shines took the community by storm. On a warm May afternoon, Amara sat in the principal's office at her school, nervously waiting. Principal Davis had called her in for a special meeting, but wouldn't say why. "Thank you for coming, Amara," Principal Davis said, entering the room with a folder in her hand. "I have some news I wanted to share with you personally." Amara straightened in her chair. "Is everything okay?" "More than okay," the principal smiled. "The school board met yesterday to discuss next year's performing arts program. They've made some important changes, and you were a big part of why." She opened the folder and slid a paper across the desk. It was a new policy for school productions with the title Inclusive Casting Guidelines. Starting next fall, all school plays and performances must use inclusive casting, Principal Davis explained. That means roles will be given based on talent and effort, not on how someone looks. Amara read the paper carefully, hardly believing what she was seeing. "This is because of what happened with the Nativity play." "Partly," the principal nodded, "but mostly because of what you did afterward. Your show at the community center showed everyone what's possible when we include all voices and traditions." A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Phillips entered, carrying a large binder. "Sorry I'm late," she said. "I was finalizing the proposal." Principal Davis gestured for her to sit down. "Mrs. Phillips has something she'd like to discuss with you." The drama teacher opened her binder and turned it toward Amara. Inside were plans for a new holiday production, not just a nativity play, but a celebration of winter traditions from around the world. "I was hoping you might help direct it," Mrs. Phillips said. "As a special student advisor, your experience with Every Light Shines makes you the perfect person for this role." Amara was speechless. The teacher who had once rejected her now wanted her help. "I've learned a lot from watching you work," Mrs. Phillips continued when Amara didn't respond. "Sometimes the best teachers are our students." Later that day, Amara walked to the community center for her weekly drama club meeting. After the success of the holiday show, Ms. Rodriguez had asked Amara to start a year-round program for neighborhood children interested in performing arts. 25 kids now attended regularly, learning about acting, directing, and working together. Guess what? Marcus, Amara's brother, called out as she entered. He had joined the drama club too and loved every minute of it. "Grandma Rose says we're getting a real stage." Grandma Rose approached with a twinkle in her eye. The community center received a grant to build a proper performance space. The committee voted to name it the Amara Johnson Stage for Inclusive Arts. "Named after me?" Amara gasped. "But I'm just a kid." "A kid who changed things," her grandmother said firmly. "Sometimes the smallest hands build the biggest bridges." As the drama club members gathered for their meeting, Amara looked around at their faces, different colors, different backgrounds, different stories, all belonging together in this space she had helped create. Zara, the girl who had told Amara about Eid during that important Saturday months ago, raised her hand. "Can we do another big show soon? My cousins are visiting this summer, and I want them to see what we can do." Amara smiled. "I think that's a great idea. What should our theme be?" Ideas flew around the room, a show about friendship, about heroes, about journeys. The excitement was contagious. That evening, as she walked home with her parents, Amara thought about how much had changed because of one painful rejection and the choice she made afterward. "You know what's funny?" she said. "If Mrs. Phillips had given me the Mary role, none of this would have happened." Her father put his arm around her shoulders. "That's how life works sometimes. The best doors are the ones you open yourself." Amara nodded, thinking of all the children who now had a place to shine, all the traditions now being celebrated, and all the changes that had come from one small decision to build something new instead of fighting to be included where she wasn't wanted. Sometimes the most powerful response to "you don't fit" was creating a place where everyone fits. That was Amara's legacy, and it was just beginning.